All right. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi, my embraced family, and welcome back to our weekly Wednesday discussion. We were going over the book, The Prophet's Method of Correcting People's Mistakes. Alhamdulillah, we are now covering sections 26 through 30. And overall, the methods that we are going over today mainly focus on some of the more serious mistakes and how the Prophet would best address companions who are making more serious mistakes that have more serious repercussions. So inshallah, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the conversation. Again, as per usual, those of you who are watching live, feel free to put in the comment section your thoughts. And those of you who are tuning in through Zoom, after the live stream, we'll have a open floor discussion through the Zoom meeting, inshallah ta'ala. Right. So inshallah, let's go ahead and jump right into it, starting with section 26. Turning away from the one who made a mistake and avoiding arguments with him to encourage his return to proper behavior, or as I like to call it, the parental method. So the example that the author uses here is a hadith, an incident where between the Prophet and Ali ibn Abi Talib, may Allah be pleased with him, where the Prophet asked Ali if he was going to come to pray. And at that time, Ali responded that, if that his soul is in Allah's hand, and if Allah wills his soul to come up for the prayer, then he will do so. And in response, the Prophet basically kind of just turned around and walked away instead of really getting into an argument with Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, regarding his conduct or his thought process. And Ali heard the Prophet respond from chapter 18, verse 54 of the Quran, where Allah says, وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرُ شَيْءٍ جَدَلًا, which translates to, but man has ever been, most of anything, prone to dispute. So we see here in this particular interaction between the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, and Ali, peace with him, instead of getting into an argument with Ali about the responsibility of getting up for prayer and how saying, well, it's up to Allah when I wake up or not is not a valid excuse, the Prophet instead chose to not engage with Ali in this context and instead chose to just back away and just leave the argument. And the reason why I call this particular method the parental method is it kind of reminds me what my mother would do to me when I was younger, and even to this day, whenever we would get into a disagreement, at a certain point, my mother would just be like, okay, whatever you say, and would just walk away. And I think those of us who have parents, all of us have parents, but many of us probably are familiar with this type of method, because I'm sure all of us have had a similar method employed on us by either our parents or our spouses or what have you. And whenever my mother would use this method on me, it was very, very effective. It would just kind of cause me to take a step back and be like, okay, I kind of feel like I'm in the wrong here. Did I do something wrong? It kind of forced me to kind of self-reflect on my own behavior, right? And this is kind of what Prophet's whole strategy was in this particular incident. Instead of getting into an argument with Ali, he instead walked away and allowed Ali to self-reflect on his own. And in certain circumstances, this can be the most effective way to help someone realize the mistake that they made, right? We know that sometimes when you're getting into a disagreement with somebody, further engaging with them in an argument, even if you are on the right, could just further escalate the situation and make things worse. We know that, like what this verse says, as human beings, we're prone to dispute, we're prone to arguments. And in many situations, even if you're in the right and you keep engaging with that individual, it just may become more of a who's right, who's wrong mentality instead of just trying to find common ground and find what's ultimately right. It's more of, I need to prove myself right, they need to prove themselves right. And so many times in those type of arguments, that individual who you're arguing with may become even more stubborn in their stance, right? Because they feel like they're being attacked, and so they just focus more on, I have to prove that I'm right. And and there are many studies. It's really interesting. There are many studies that show how you engage in dialogue with somebody could really just change their mindset. And there's even a psychological component to it. I'm not going to try and get into too much of the vivid details, but it's really interesting because some studies show that there's a psychological component to argue that when someone is kind of being called out on bad behavior in certain circumstances, it kind of triggers a defense mechanism, like a natural defense mechanism where they feel like they have to defend themselves, like a fight or flight kind of response. And so in those situations, the best way to respond is really just to disengage and just kind of turn back and end the discussion there, and allow that person to come to terms with their own behavior on their own. So alhamdulillah, very good lesson that we can get from this one incident. So inshallah, moving on, we'll go to section 27, rebuking one who has made a mistake. So this is an incident that involved Hatem ibn Abdul Muttalib, in which he, radiallahu anhu, may Allah be pleased with him, in which he ended up sending word to Mecca that the Muslims were planning to eventually come and conquer Mecca. And when we first hear this, the first thing that probably comes to our mind is, oh my God, subhanAllah, did Hatem just betray the Muslims? Well, what's going on? What is this? This is, of course, during the time where the Muslims were ostracized from Mecca. They were in Medina, and there were all these different wars and battles happening between the Meccans and the Muslims, right? And so this caused, when you first initially hear about this, the first thing that pops into your mind is, this is a traitor, right? But look how the Prophet ﷺ confronted Hatem ibn Abdul Muttalib, right? He asked him straight up, he approached him and asked him, what made you do that, right? So he confronted him and just asked him verbatim, what caused you to take this action? And so Abdul Muttalib responded that, I believe in Allah and His Messenger, and I never changed, but I wanted to make some gesture towards them through which Allah might protect my family and my wealth. All your other companions have someone there through whom Allah will protect their families and their wealth. The Prophet said, he has spoken the truth, so do not do anything but good to him. So on top of that, the hadith that continues that Umar ibn Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, he was very angry, right? And said that, and asked Allah to basically allow him to, cut off his head for his betrayal. And the Prophet again responded by, telling him, this is not the proper etiquette. You shouldn't do that. The Prophet responded to him, asked Umar, how do you know that he betrayed us? Maybe Allah looked at the people of Badr and said, do whatever you like, for paradise is guaranteed to you. And this caused Umar to back down and say, Allah and His Messenger know best. So let's quickly kind of dissect this whole situation, here. So, as you mentioned previously, it was apparent at that moment in the naked eye that Hatem betrayed the Muslims, right? But instead of getting angry and immediately calling for his execution, because we know that in any state, in any nation, treason is typically considered a capital offense. The Prophet ﷺ first, approached Hatem and asked him, what caused you to do this action? What caused you to do this? He asked him and approached him and engaged into a dialogue with him first, right? And of course, Hatem explained his reasoning. What he did was still wrong, but the Prophet ﷺ gave him an opportunity to explain himself. And on top of that, when Umar was calling for his execution, the Prophet ﷺ defended Hatem because he recognized all the khair, all the good that Hatem has done in the past, such as participation in the Battle of Badr. So a few of the main lessons we can get from this particular hadith is, number one, when someone makes a mistake, even the most serious of mistakes, sometimes the best way to approach them, instead of becoming automatically accusatory, you should first just ask them what caused them to commit that action. Give them an opportunity to kind of explain themselves, as well as self-reflect as to whether or not what they did was the right course of action, right? So keeping the situation at a manageable means, right? On top of that, we learn from this hadith that a wrong that someone does does not automatically negate all the good that they did in the past. And this is something that in our society, in our community at large, we really struggle with this concept, right? We know of so many situations where someone in our community or a public figure who has done so much good, so much khair, so much benefit, brought so much benefit to the community, they do one thing wrong, and the entire community completely turns against them. And it's as if the person has always been nothing but a bad person, has brought nothing but evil and wickedness to the community, which absolutely is not the case. And so, despite the fact that what Hatim ibn Abdul Muttalib did in this situation was a pretty severe offense, this did not negate all the good that he did in the past. And Prophet upheld the goodness that Hatim did, I'll be pleased with him, and his accomplishments in the past. So again, a lot of really good lessons that we can pull from this one hadith. SubhanAllah. So moving forward, we're going up to number 28, blaming the one who made a mistake. So the hadith used for this section is regarding incident between Ali and Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. And in this particular incident, there was two camels, and Hamza, in a drunken state, ended up slaughtering these camels that belonged to Ali. May Allah be pleased with him. And when Ali discovered this, he went to the Prophet ﷺ and told him what he saw, and how he'd never seen such a horrendous sight before, and found out that this was done by Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. And so the Prophet ﷺ, along with Ali, went to go visit Hamza. They found out where he was, and the Prophet ﷺ started to really rebuke Hamza for his behavior, blaming him for what he did. But the Prophet ﷺ, peace and be upon him, he was a very intelligent and very aware person. He was very observant, right? So the Prophet ﷺ noticed that Hamza wasn't really himself, and that he was actually intoxicated. Now this incident happened before the hukm, the ruling of alcohol, was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that completely forbade drinking. So this was during the time when the Muslims were still legally allowed to drink before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely forbade it. And so when the Prophet ﷺ noticed this and saw that Hamza was in this state, the Prophet ﷺ just kind of turned on his heels and left. And so from this incident, we can, again, there's a couple of things we can learn from this. Also, on top of that, I may have to correct myself on number 27, because I said Haddad. I don't think it was Haddad ibn Abdul Muttalib. I think it was just Haddad. So please do excuse me for saying Abdul Muttalib with point number 27. It's Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, which is the number 28. So I do apologize for that confusion. That was a mistake on my part. But back to number 28. So some of the key lessons I think we can get from this incident is, number one, when someone commits an action or a mistake that is very severe, sometimes you need to be very prompt in addressing it. So in this issue here, Hamza ended up severely or hacking up and slaughtering Ali's camels, right? And that was not his right. That was something that was a really big offense. And so the Prophet ﷺ wasted no time to go to Hamza and confront him about this, right? And in previous sessions, we've discussed times where it's best to kind of hold back from confronting someone and instead kind of be a little bit strategic about it. But again, it all depends on a few factors, right? Number one, of course, is the severity of the mistake, right? Not all mistakes or sins or actions are on the same level. We know this as Muslims that there are major sins and minor sins. There are major mistakes and minor mistakes. With certain major mistakes, it might require you to promptly try to address the situation as quickly as possible. But number two, of course, we also have to consider one's own status or one's own reputation or a level of authority that they have. So for example, if you're just someone's neighbor, you have no authority or relationship with that person, and they commit a mistake, even if it's like something severe, you may not really be in a position where you can effectively address it, right? So it's another factor for us to keep in mind. But number two, another, I think, a really important lesson for us to get from this is, again, like I mentioned previously, this was a incident that happened before the prohibition of khamr, of intoxicants, was revealed. And this incident, of course, just shows a reminder for us as Muslims today, just the evils of intoxicants, the evils of khamr and alcohol, and how it can cause a person to completely just go off the rails. But on top of that, we're reminded that Hamza ibn Abdul Talib, he was a companion, right? And he was from amongst the Muslims, and so when this happened, we understand that there were also other companions who struggled with drinking, right? And it's a lesson for us as Muslims that no matter how righteous someone may be, they may still struggle with certain issues or challenges. And when we're dealing with those individuals, or maybe even we ourselves are dealing with certain challenges, or struggling with certain sins, we should have some form of empathy and compassion for them, right? So another, I think, important lesson for us to kind of get from this particular issue. So inshallah, just two more points, and then we will wrap up and open the floor for discussion here in the Zoom meeting. So point number 29 and 30 are somewhat interconnected in my opinion. So I'm going to try and cover them within the same scope. So number 29 is shunning the one who has made a mistake. And so there are two incidents that are used in this example here. I'm going to focus on the first one. This is an incident where there was an expedition going on, and there was a Muslim man, his name is not given in this hadith, who ended up following someone in order to kill them in battle. This person yelled, "I am Muslim," but that didn't stop this Muslim man from pulling down his sword and striking him and eventually killing him. And so when the Prophet ﷺ, and I believe, and those of you who are watching through Zoom, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this is a separate incident from the one that we're usually all very familiar, the one that's involved Osama. I think this is a different incident involving a different companion, just based off the chain of narration. I could be wrong, and so for those of you who know specifically this is the same exact hadith or the same incident regarding the hadith that we're all very familiar with that involved Osama, then please do let me know, either in the comments or after the program ends, inshallah, with a full discussion in the Zoom. But anyway, I digress. So in this incident, the man ended up killing someone who claimed to be Muslim. When the Prophet ﷺ found out about this, he was very furious. He was very angry when he found out about this. And so he started giving a speech about the evil of this act. And when this Muslim man heard of this, he tried getting the Prophet's attention and telling him that this man was only claiming to be Muslim in order to defend himself, similar to what was said in the hadith that we spoke about in previous section. And the Prophet ﷺ shunned him and turned his back and kept preaching until the third time, when the man said again, he only said he was Muslim in order to defend himself. The Prophet ﷺ said, Allah scorns the one who kills a believer. He said this 3 times. So in this particular incident, we see the Prophet ﷺ was being very, very stringent with this Muslim man. He was being very strict, and he was being very very upfront. He was not holding back in this case, because this was a mistake that was very, very severe, right? He killed someone who claimed to be a believer, which we know is one of the biggest sins that one can commit, one of the biggest mistakes that one can commit. So this particular mistake, it really does require a very powerful and significant response. Right? And again, the Prophet ﷺ is the leader of the Muslims, so it was stringent upon him to deal with this matter in a very, very severe way, in order to highlight to his community, to his nation, how severe this mistake is. Right? In a way, he had to make an example out of this Muslim man. And in certain types of action and mistakes, this is what a leader has to do. But again, like we said, it all depends on what your own status or authority is, right? In your community, in your family, in the masjid. It all depends on what type of status that you have. Are you an imam? Are you a board member? Are you a teacher? If so, depending on what your status is, a different response will be necessary. And so number 30 is somewhat around the same. Number 30 speaks about the boycott that was done by the group of Muslims who avoided going to joining in the campaign of Tabuk without an excuse. I think a lot of us are familiar with this incident. We've heard it, a lot of us have heard it many times. So to paraphrase, or the abridged version, what have you, is where there were a group of Muslims who did not join in jihad, did not join in battle, the struggle in the campaign of Tabuk, even though all the Muslim men were called to join in this battle. When the Muslims came back from the campaign, these group of Muslims were confronted, and they admitted that they did not have a valid excuse. They just, for whatever reason, they just didn't go. This included Ka'ab ibn Malik, who is the main narrator of this particular hadith. And so when the Prophet ﷺ confronted them about this and found out that they willingly avoided joining in this campaign without a valid excuse, the Prophet ﷺ commanded the Muslim community to boycott them for about 50 days. AKA, they were not allowed to be spoken to. So, as punishment for the very severe mistake that this group of Muslims made, the community was commanded to boycott them for 50 days. And in this situation, of course, with no one to really interact with, this forced Ka'ab ibn Malik and the others to reflect on themselves, reflect on what they did, really just reflect on the severity of their mistakes. And of course, after the 50 days passed, the boycott was lifted and they were able to interact with the Muslim community again, without any issues, because they serve their punishment, right? So we see again in this particular situation, the severity of their mistake was so high, it required to have a severe response and a severe punishment in order to teach the community how damaging this type of mistake could be. People's lives were at stake, right? As well as, serve as a deterrent for others to commit those same actions. Now, contemporarily speaking, by today's standards, I don't think any of us are going to be in a position where we are able to boycott someone or call a community to boycott someone, right? So, for example, if you see a brother at a masjid, he does something that you don't like or is a serious mistake, you calling for his boycott or whatever is probably not going to solve anything. That's why you got to take the situation within the context and the circumstances that are within this situation. I mean, we got to kind of look at the situation overall. And I think the main lesson that we get from this particular section is that there are certain mistakes that do need to have a very strong and severe response, right? Depending on the severity of the mistake and how it can have a negative impact on the community. But again, one can only take such measures if they have such an authority that allows them to do so, right? You going on Facebook and saying, everyone should stop speaking to so-and-so because so-and-so did this. That's not going to solve anything. We have to use these brains that Allah has given us and not take hadith and just go with it and do it off of it. We have to take into consideration the circumstances which led to what happened in the hadith, right? And just kind of extract some of the contemporary lessons we can get from the hadith. But all right, I think I've talked my head off not long enough. So inshallah, we can go ahead and end the live stream and open the floor for discussion. Those of you who have joined us through the live stream, jazakumullah khairan for joining us. Inshallah, we'll see you all next week.